Hello and welcome. It's Tuesday night here in the UK. I hope you're having a good evening. If you're here, if you're watching across the pond or anywhere else around the world, good afternoon or good morning. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and spend some time with us here today. I'm delighted to have another guest with us this evening, talking about podcasting and the juggling world that we do within education, which will become apparent very, very soon. So before we get going, please make sure you do subscribe and also make sure you hit that notification bell. I do plan on doing one or two sort of unscheduled pre-Christmas lives, just to sort of a little bit of festive season and a thank you for me for kind of spending the time with me and supporting me this year. So yeah, make sure you've got all that clicked and have those bells whistling and chiming through, through the festive season, so you can get everything that you need as they're going through. So, of course, if you haven't already, please do check out the audio podcast. So we've got educationonfire.com/listen, takes you to this page, and then you can easily click through and follow or subscribe in whichever platform you like to use as well. Remember, this idea of the Education on Fire show gives us the opportunity to come together to have comments and to sort of spend some time and have a little bit more of interaction than we do also have on the audio podcast, and a chance for me to be able to sort of bring people on in sort of real time. So yeah, that's the reason for this show, and whichever way you like to consume the stuff that we're doing here on Education on Fire, then yeah, those are your sort of two main options. So this week we released our episode with Nathaniel Florencio, and we were talking about professional learning community. He's had experience through various aspects of education and now really sort of leaning into community, which of course is something we talk a lot about on the show and something which we feel is really important, and a chance to kind of give the environment for children to really sort of grow and thrive. So yeah, do check that out, episode 372, which went live on Monday. So let's bring on Dana, and we're going to be talking about the podcast that she does. She's very kindly had me on as a guest, which I think is going to be going live in the not too distant future. So we'll have a chance to chat about that, and also the world of education from people that are working within education, as well as trying to make a big difference as we come in. So let's bring her on. Hi, Dana. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for managing to put us in during your lunch hour. I know it's a very busy day and a very busy educational life that we all lead in terms of sort of spinning many plates. So yeah, thanks so much indeed.
Yes, thanks so much for having me on today.
So why don't we start with the podcast? What's the premise of what you do, and sort of why did you start it?
So I started the Out of the Trenches podcast in May of 2020, and it is basically a story about resilience, right? Resilience that people have in education. Their stories of a struggle that they've had anytime during their career and what they learned from it. So because I've been through many trenches in education, and I did start it during the time where it was a big trench during the shutdown of the pandemic. So I've kept it going. I don't have quite as many episodes as you do. I've got about 100 less. So I just published 275, and I've written a book as well that's a little bit about my own story. It has some self-help tips and also has some stories of guests I've had on the podcast.
Amazing. And what is it about education that you love so much? What is it that sort of takes your sort of day to day in terms of your work within the sort of the education world?
So currently I'm working, it's called CLDE, which is Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Education. The school district I work at in Colorado, that's their title, but a lot of the wording that we use in the US is ELD or ELL. A lot of people also use multilingual learners. So right now I'm working to mentor teachers who teach ELD, but also who have a lot of multilingual learners in their classes. And I got into education because I'm a language person. I taught French for many years. I've lived in a lot of countries like France and Quebec and in Norway. So I picked up languages very easily, speak Norwegian and German fluently as well. And I still tutor these languages some. So right now it's kind of the flip side, helping these mostly newcomer students learn English, but also strategies that teachers can use in their classrooms for these students of varying levels of English knowledge. So I think that's what kind of has kept me going. It's also working as school change initiatives. I know there's always some type of change that needs to occur, and how can we do better as I see it from this perspective, because I've worked a lot with discipline and attendance before, and I've worked with instructional coaching kind of as a whole for the whole school, but this is more focused on the English language learner population. So I'm kind of looking at it from that lens and how like what we're doing, how it may serve students, but there are a lot of things that can be improved upon.
And I'm assuming that a part of this is almost social as well as sort of the language side of it, because if you're sort of coming from it and you're learning and you feel slightly out of your depth, if you kind of feel like it's a world that you're not as familiar with, then all of that becomes part and parcel of, I guess, what you're supporting with, as well as the actual sort of teaching of the language.
Yes, it's a lot the social language, but what I'm seeing at the school I work at is a large number of students who speak Spanish, who have maybe been in the U.S. their whole life, or at least since they started school. But so there's a lot of Spanish used in the classrooms, maybe not by the teacher, but by the students. So it is what I'm seeing is not like super easy for some of these students to learn English if they're being surrounded socially by Spanish. There are opportunities for them to be more active in the community and sports and other performance art and things like that. But of course social language is different than academic language, and what these students are being confronted by is they're using social Spanish, whether they come from El Salvador or from Mexico, which might use a different idioms and all that in Spanish, but then they're being asked to learn academic language of English, right? So they're being presented with these exercises and work that they have to do in academic language of English when they might not have even been exposed to social English if they're newcomers and they haven't been like watching media in their home country in English.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like you say, that sort of support network there. And also, I think, from my point of view, or just understanding that you sort of have these two things happening simultaneously, the social side of it and the, like say, the speaking within your family or within your social circle, very different. And I think we can kind of identify that even in sort of English speaking. I know sort of the things that you have to write in the way you have to write
Mm-hmm.
in an exam, certainly here in the UK or as part of school, is very different than if you were just sort of chatting to your friends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I talk to a lot of people who've done their doctorate dissertation on my podcast. And also, when you're talking about like writing blogs or writing an educational book, it's different than writing like an academic paper or a dissertation as well. So there's a lot of differences in that, like written English, writing blogs and when you're providing content for educators.
Yeah. So in terms of sort of out of the trenches, how do you sort of find that works with the people that you've spoken to? Is it often a kind of a everything out in one go, or is it that kind of I'm still involved in education, but I've able to sort of change my lifestyle within it, or I've been able to change the way that I support people in education? I mean, for me, it was always slightly different because I sort of came as a musician. I'm still a musician and I teach music, and so the world of education sort of spirals out of that, as opposed to being a teacher sort of 24/7 in a school that then decided to leave or to kind of pivot in some way or another.
Sure. So I would say a lot of my guests, at least I would think in the past 6 months or so, have either written a book or they've maybe left um, the principalship, or they've maybe gone from the principalship to a district level position to find something that fills their bucket more. They're still serving educators in some space, but it might not be in that school environment, right? Some of the people that are still working as a principal, for example, they'll talk about like a difficulty they've had with maybe certain students or something that's happened during an initiative they were trying to implement. Um, a guest I pre-chatted with yesterday talked about everything that her teachers did during the pandemic, but then were not appreciated a few months later, right? So, it's kind of those trenches of like, how do you support your staff if you're a leader, right? Because right now we're still, as we move into 24, right, there are still a lot of educators leaving. A lot of educators don't feel appreciated. The salaries are not improving. Some people do find their niche in that support role in terms of like coaching, um, more higher level administration, or working with educators on a consulting basis. So I kind of choose guests that kind of are the gamut. I had a guest on not too long ago that was a fairly new teacher as well, but she's written a book, which is not an educational book. It's more of a teen book for self-help. So, it's good to hear from people who are new, but also veteran to the educational profession.
Yeah, because there's a very different perspective there, isn't there? Like you say, the maturity and experience gives you something, but there's something about the vitality of someone who's just coming into the profession and also maybe coming in with fresh eyes, understanding the system as it is at the minute, whether we want to change that or not. And like say,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of salary and progression and all those sorts of things, but maybe feeling like they can do it in their way, in a slightly different way, which has that more sustainability, which of course is a really sort of important factor. And in terms of sort of your kind of, I say week to week or month to month, how do you find that sort of plate spinning in terms of, let's say, producing the podcast, being in a
Mm-hmm.
school, like you say, writing and all that sort of stuff? Do you sort of have a specific plan that kind of helps you keep that sort of with that sort of longevity in mind?
Um, I really just at this point take interviews as they come. I haven't been super like active in reaching out to people. I think I got your name from the Teach Better Podcast Network. And I've, taken a lot of guests recently because I've gotten emails maybe from their publicist or they've contacted me via a pod matching site. So, maybe a year ago, I was more active on just reaching out to people and getting guests to come on. So I'm trying not to spread myself too thin. I do have other things I'm committed to, like I'm on the board of directors of a language teacher organization for the state. So we have our spring conference coming up in February. So, I want to not be like too like recording podcasts all the time. So I record kind of as they come. I don't do a live show. I've done live shows for like my 100th episode, my 200th episode, and when I get to 300, I'll do a live show as
Yeah.
well. It might not be until like February or March at that time, but the writing, my book was published a year ago, just a year and a few days ago, December 2nd. So it's still that promo. I still have to promo it. I do write some blogs for Teach Better Team. I'm not writing quite as many as before, but I kind of write as they come. If I'm experiencing something that I like to share, or just I have something that I really feel like writing about and sharing about. But I do also participate in a couple of masterminds as well online. So I think that balance, like I've learned over the years in education not to bring work home. Like when I taught French or English, I've taught English in high school as well. There would be a lot to grade. So I did bring a lot of grading home at the beginning, but now I'm just like I know it's more of a support role for the teachers, and it's more of an administrative role because we're doing a lot of testing and putting schedules together and things like that. So that's things I could do at home if I really needed to, but I need to have that work-life balance with these other endeavors that really fill my bucket. I feel like the participating in the masterminds, the blogging, the podcasting is what is filling my bucket, because sometimes just being in the K-12 educational system in the U.S. Is frustrating, and you might have colleagues at work who are negative. So if you have the other outside passion, it helps you I wouldn't say survive, but maybe get through the day easier and know that this is not the end all be all.
Yeah, I completely agree, and like you say, you can be completely in the middle of something which feels like say heavy or traumatic, or might even get you down over a period of time. But it's certainly the thing I love the most about the podcast from my end is the fact that you get to have these conversations. You realize there are people out there who are doing amazing things, that are doing things in a different way, that have a perspective that you kind of walk into and enjoy, and you can sort of support each other. It might be like say within a mastermind, it might be that they're part of your network, it might just be that the fact that you're hearing that podcast while you're out for a walk or whatever, you kind of think, oh yeah, I am surrounding myself with people that have got a different take or positivity about how it can be different and how they're showing up differently. And that kind of really does support me. I'm like exactly as you sort of said.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and I feel like also like you can't um, get too preoccupied by things you can't control if you're working within a system. right? Like you might have ideas, but your role might not lead to you being able to use the ideas if there are other people over you who think differently. So, I like to absorb content. I like to learn a lot from other educators via the masterminds and things like that. But it might help me in a future role when I'm learning, or being able to discuss things with people in these masterminds help me a lot as well.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned before the idea of conferences. I know, I
Mhm.
think when we chatted before, we are talking about Danny in terms of the better leaders, better schools, and that sort of area that you are sort of aware of as well. What do you find sort of conferences bring and give you, and the reason why you sort of like being part of those sorts of things?
I've always liked to go to conferences. I just recently attended it's called ACTFL. It's the Association of Foreign Language Teachers for the U.S. And that's one that I attended back in 2000 for the first time when I started out in education. And, just being able to hear ideas from people who are teaching. In my type of role now, it was good to hear from people who had sessions on equity, or we had roundtables where there were only about 10 people, and it was more of a discussion. So you don't always have to attend the presentations, they do have other options. And also just being out there and presenting myself, sharing my ideas, networking with people, being able to um, carry some of these things back, if applicable, to the building. And I think this year I'm going to more conferences than ever before because I've been accepted to speak at several. But that's kind of like how I want to balance work life, right? And I think when we had the virtual conferences for that period of time, it I did attend and present at several, but just seeing like the crowds of people and like having a lot of people attend your session is fulfilling, right? And sometimes there's a I would say there's a fine line between too many people in the conference hall and just enough. Like I went to two in November back to back, and one of them was a little too crowded, but the other one was just fine. So,
Yeah, and I actually came across to Boston in the fall and went to a conference in terms of sort of digital and specifically eCam, which is what we use to do all this sort of streaming. And it was wonderful to suddenly, like say, the conversations that you have outside of workshops and presentations and things, which are much harder to do in that virtual space. And I think there is something about that downtime conversation and connection, which is wonderful when you sort of have that sort of opportunity from a conference standpoint. And you sort of mentioned that you sort of lived in lots of different countries and you have that kind of experience. Just as someone with that experience, just explain sort of what you've learned from that in terms of not necessarily how they sort of do education in different places, but how we're all doing education as part of the world, but just the highlights of why this is better or different, or what sort of worked and what you've been able to take back to where you are there in Colorado.
so it's been quite a while since I either went to school or worked in a educational setting. Like in Norway, I taught in 2003, 2004, for example, and that was a private school. But I was a student myself in high school and university there, and then I was a student in grad school in Quebec. And did some work in France as well, both work and some just private schooling there. But I do think people are, if you're living in a country where you have to learn English, like in Norway, people are more adept to learning languages, right? They might not always learn French, Spanish, or German, but they at least know the value of having that second language, being fluent in the second language, and also being able to travel easily to the other countries. Now, living in Colorado, when I taught French, you could say, hey, Quebec's not that far away. You could travel to Canada, right? But it is harder for students to like envision themselves in these countries where they're able to use that language, if they're living kind of in this landlocked area, right, in the middle of the U.S. And what we've done as language teachers a lot, we try to use community resources. Like if there's an Alliance Française in the city, we'd go to some of their events, or if there's some type of French film festival, or even just taking students to a French restaurant where they'd be served in French and have some authentic food helps. But the educational system, I mean, I think it varies from country to country and different areas. I do really like in like Norway and a lot of European countries how it is tuition free. Of course, it is difficult financially for a lot of students in the U.S. to pay for their education. But what a lot of schools in the U.S. are doing at the secondary level is what we call CTE, Career Tech Ed, and they are starting to give students a high school credit in the last 2 years of, or sorry, college credit in the last 2 years of high school. So being able to learn that career. My 15-year-old is going to be going to an open house tomorrow at one of the district's CTE schools, maybe taking some courses at that location next year in culinary arts. So it's good that more schools locally, at least in Colorado, are giving kids that option. But I think this has been an option in many European countries for a long time. And the U.S. is just kind of like getting the ball rolling on that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I really appreciate your time today, and that oversight of these different things, and the language is something which I think many people will understand, and it's great to sort of understand what it's like say globally, as well as a lot of the live sessions we've done have been sort of more UK based. So it's great to have a US perspective on these things, and something which we've done a lot on the audio podcast. So to be able to bring those back into the live shows is amazing. So just before we wrap up, do tell people again the name of the podcast and the book, and where people can find out more.
So my podcast is called Out of the Trenches, and you can find it on Apple. You can find it on Podbean, anywhere you download Spotify. And it's also, my YouTube channel is Out of Trenches PC. That's my handle for Instagram and Twitter. I'm also found at Dana Goodier on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. My book is called Out of the Trenches, Stories of Resilient Educators. So you can find that on Amazon. There also is a Kindle version. And yeah, my website is danagoodier.com.
Fantastic. Dana, thank you so much for spending your time and for dashing out and being part of our thing for your lunch. And I'll let you get back to your school. But yeah, really appreciate it. And do reach out to us and let us know if there's anything else that we can do. So many thanks to Dana, but also at the same time, we also like to be able to leave you with a previous episode from the podcast. And I thought I would just here mention Sir Linkalot. He took me through the idea of being able to use his spelling app, which has been a wonderful thing for so many people, especially within the primary sector, and got me in amazingly new ways of thinking about how you can spell, how you can sort of take some of the ideas and sort of put them into pictures and understandings and phrases. So do go and check that out. It is an amazing listen. So back from March 2020. But as I said, great to go back into the archives and maybe come across something you haven't listened to much before. So thank you so much for spending some time with us. Thank you so much for supporting the show. As I said, make sure you subscribed and hit that notification bell for any unscheduled episodes that we do. We'll be back again next Tuesday. And in the meantime, have a great evening if you're here in the UK, and the rest of the day wherever else you are. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.